Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Ryan Carr. Fitz is driving back from vacation, so it's me and Ryan. I feel like Fitz has been absent quite a bit from class this summer, Ryan.
Not like 4 summers ago when he got the whole summer off on the transition over. Listen, man, it's that time of the year. You got to enjoy it.
You're gonna take time off in August, right?
Yeah, we always go away the beginning of August.
Okay.
I think actually my wife wants to move it to a Thursday now, so we might not be on the show. We will talk about that later off camera.
Yeah.
But either way, we will figure that out. But no, man, it's that time of the year. Recruiting is a little slow right now, but there's always something to discuss. And so we have plenty, on the rundown today to get into, including I thought a very good Derek Hoodjer interview that you and Nate did. I didn't get to see the whole thing. I think I know enough of the topics that we can get into it, of course. But, I watched about 2/3 of it before I got interrupted by my children. Story of my life. And, from what I saw, it was very good. So go check that out if you guys haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the description of the video. Also, it's going to be tagged multiple times throughout the video. Probably next up once you get to the end of the live show as well. So just stick around, and it'll be super easy. Just click on the video, and it'll all be good. That's what we're going to talk about today is mostly just recapping that interview and getting the reaction to some of the things he had to say. Because when you got 30 minutes, and for this is also just to explain for fans of they got a lot of the, why didn't you ask about X? Why didn't you ask about Y? And it's like, well, if you say a player's name specifically, that's a recruiting violation, and so he, A, can't answer the question, and B, is going to get pissed because you put him in a bad position. So we didn't ask about specific recruits or specific situations. We did cover general topics that relate to those players, and so basically what we're doing is we're trying to get as many of his thoughts as possible, and then we can talk about it and evaluate those here on this particular show. So that's what we're going to get into today as well. Also some 2028 players to know, and something we've been saving for this particular show, Ryan's summer superlatives. I've been excited for this. It's a tailor-made YouTube conversation topic, and I'm excited to do it later in the show as well. Just a quick teaser. Just give me a morsel of what we're talking about a little bit later.
Yeah, so I basically before or right as everyone was going on vacation, pulled some sources, right? Trying to get their feel on, guys in the 2027 class that, they feel good about for this reason or another, right? So, looking at guys that, like one of them, for example, is, who do they feel most confident is, going to come in here and you'll be what they expect, right? Someone that's going to come in and maybe not necessarily play right away, but, this is what they expect. Safest bet is kind of what I call it, right? We breakout candidates for senior year, guys that I think or myself and others think underrated, things like that. So it's a little bit of my opinion mixed with multiple sources and different conversations I tried to have earlier this month, and actually getting feedback from those who are involved in this recruitment or that recruitment, whatever it may be, guys that, really involved in that process. And I think it worked out pretty well as far as the feedback we got and what we learned from it.
Yeah, so stick around for the end of the show, and if you can't, make sure you like the video and subscribe so you always get notifications. Reminds you to come back to the conversation. If you're listening on the podcast version, by the way, make sure you download, you do all that great stuff to help us grow the podcast side of things. We've reached 1 million downloads for the second or third time because we keep changing podcast platforms, so all of our numbers keep resetting, but we deeply appreciate the people that watch and also listen on your favorite podcast player. And of course, he had to beat me to the joke. Nate Bauer here in the chat says, surprised you didn't have noted recruiting expert Nate Bauer on today's show. I was going to give you credit for asking the first question we're going to get into today, Nate. But now I'm just going to say, here's a question somebody asked. Actually, I think the question is in this particular clip we're going to play of how recruiting works now with NIL.
From the first contact to when a kid ends up at Penn State or not, but makes his decision, how frequently is it starting with a number and how frequently is it starting with something else?
Yeah, I think that's so case by case as well. And I think there's times where, if you're the first school to contact a kid and you're the first offer, it's probably a little more of a traditional model of recruiting, what it used to look like. Conversely, if you're the 13th or 14th school to offer a kid and they've already been on multiple campuses multiple times, the financial component may have already become kind of brought to the forefront. And there are still young men out there that want to pick the school that they want to go to and figure out the finances after that. And there's other players and families that they want to make sure they hit a certain dollar amount. Those are the schools they're going to look at. So I don't think there's a one size fits all kind of perception or pattern of how recruiting operates. I think it's all kind of individualized.
What did you take from that?
Exactly how I think it is playing out, or exactly how I've read it over the last couple of years. I can point names. I could give you whatever you want as far as guys over the years, right? Their money was very, very important. I think we've kind of talked about, how it impacted guys like Khalil Taylor, guys like Gabe Jenkins. And I'm not saying that was the first thing for them, but with time that becomes incredibly important. And you have a lot of others where, it's not really, they care more still about the relationships, the academic side, what the school and coaches are going to provide for them, to get them to the next level. That's truly is case by case basis. So everything that Derek said there is pretty much exactly how I've always read that, or at least over the last handful of years. It was a little different, 2-3 years ago, but you can find both. This staff certainly prioritizes or would love to see guys. And James Franklin's staff was the same way, where that is a topic that you get down the road, right? Maybe a couple of visits in, go on some dates first, right? Before we talk about the next step. I think every school prefers that. But there are also incredibly talented players, especially top 100, right? How many times we got to bring up that top 100 number? Those guys usually, if it's not at the forefront in the beginning, they know it's going to be incredibly important. And those are oftentimes the players where, whether it's Penn State or other schools, you kind of have to get into that topic a little sooner than you probably prefer. And oftentimes I would say it's other schools kind of initiating that, saying, hey, look, we see, we believe in your potential and all these numbers and different things that, people put out there and what you've done as far as an athlete. This is why, let's get into this now. And there's sometimes where you can kind of buy a commitment pretty early on, whether they stick or not. That depends.
That to me is the conversation about contenders and teams that are trying to either flip a narrative or buy contention in a certain situation. And Tennessee just announced a commitment with a running back literally today, and it was interesting because it's a 3-year contract that he was given. We talked about it on Nate asked Hoodjer about that in terms of, we haven't seen a whole lot of 3-year contracts. Why wouldn't you do that? And then he goes into the reasons why 3-year contracts don't make a lot of sense. And then lo and behold, Tennessee, who was competing with Ohio State, puts out a bunch of different stipulations, 3-year contract, et cetera, et cetera. And not to take us down that particular conversation rabbit hole, but just the idea of, if you are not the lead dog in the recruitment, you are more likely to bring up the money earlier, it seems to me. Do you think that's a fair characterization? And is that like part of what drives this up, is just the literal competition for a limited number of resources of players?
It's hard to say, right? I'm not involved in those day-to-day ones, but yes, that can certainly be the case. We've seen that kind of with Texas Tech in multiple recruitments here and other schools as well. I think a lot of it is, though, still kind of comes at the end, and it's throwing in those extra perks, whatever it may be. We kind of talked a little bit about Gabe Jenkins and, the opportunity Colorado's kind of provided for his family to go out there. And so, we talked about, what was it with, it was who went to Auburn? I'm sorry, the wide receiver. I'm drawing a blank. Thank you. Yes, Deshaun Hall. Like, there was perks that Auburn threw kind of in there at the end that, Penn State didn't really plan on matching. And even when they did kind of at the end, Auburn spiced up the numbers to the point where it was probably a little over the top for what Penn State preferred. And, Aiden Gibson too, to some degree as well. So I still think a lot of it comes down to, all right, both schools are kind of in this ballpark range. What perks can you throw on at the end, especially when it is kind of like a 50-50, I really like both schools and coaches and all that. What way can you spice it up? You've seen cars, you've seen family travel. There's a lot of different ways that schools go about doing that.
So this was my thought coming out of that yesterday. having listened back to it and then thinking about it for today's show, but I kind of think this has been answered in the negative in the last 5 minutes or so. I saw this as the conversation of if you can get a guy on campus 12, 13 times, build that relationship, then bring up NIL, like that's a better model. But honestly, at any point when somebody decides to go all in and, push their chips in like you just described, or even at the very end, and it's that final, how do we get this over the line? It seems like, and I know this is too long of a wind-up. Let me rewind. I was thinking 2028 will show us their ability to recruit and to do things in their order and timeline, right? Build relationship, then talk about NIL. But it seems like that is a moot point. As much as like those things can help, the thing that's going to get it across the finish line for some guys is just going to be the perks, what you just outlined.
Yeah, it's a case-by-case basis. Going back to what Hoodjer really kind of like, I will bring up George Parkinson all the time just because I know his schools, I know who's involved. Like, I'd be very, very surprised if Oregon or Ohio State or LSU or Texas A&M or some of those schools involved with him have not already started kind of initiating that, because Parkinson's is going to be a highly coveted player, because he looks, not only is he a highly coveted player, but at a very important position, right? Edge rusher. So it really is kind of case by case. I think you can look down at, some of the lower ranked guys, right? Guys that Penn State got committed earlier in this cycle. Whether it's some of the O linemen they got or whatever, where you didn't really have to do that. Yeah. You're not competing against yourself, or you were competing against schools that were a little kind of below you in some ways. But especially, man, those guys at the top, and you're going against the Miamis and the Techs and the Oregons and all those, those schools that kind of feel like they have unlimited cash at times. I understand why those schools want to be aggressive. Like there's ways where those schools can push a recruitment forward when maybe the other 4 or 5 schools in the mix would prefer they not. And so it's not a fair game right now, if that makes sense. It's kind of like European soccer, right? Where I don't know how many people in here watch soccer, right? We just all got the World Cup, but the Real Madrids and the Man Uniteds and all those kind of big clubs in the world, they have unlimited cash and they can force through transfers that my team, Everton, they can't really force through. And that's kind of how college football is playing out at the moment, if that makes sense.
So I actually asked Hoodjer about that in a roundabout way. That very high on David Tarawale and especially Elijah Gurton, 2 guys at high-level positions, edge rusher, offensive tackle, that have NFL dimensions, right? Size, length, growth potential. Not saying they're going to be NFL players, but they have the earmarks of these traits are what everybody wants. And maybe they had 1 or 2 things that didn't kind of fit the mold that then made them 4 or 5-star recruits, but they could eventually become that. And Penn State was able to secure both those players. So is that a market inefficiency, was my question to Derek Hoodjer. Is that something that is built into your model that you're trying to do at expensive positions? So maybe there's, a Maxwell Hiller that, yes, you would like to have him, but like money is going to be a major thing there. And if you can find somebody who brings you that stuff, but is not all present immediately, is that something you're trying to do? Is that a product of this particular cycle? Here's his answer.
Evaluating players and finding value that whether it's because they're just simply under-recruited or under-identified, or maybe they've got a developmental path that we believe in and we believe we can get them to a spot, and maybe other people don't believe in that same developmental path. Or maybe it's, we feel stronger about a guy than most other schools do. I think finding players that are value adds and giving them time to develop, I think it's a strategy that a component of your roster has to be that, in order to kind of build some homegrown guys that 4 or 5 years down the road are going to be impact players. And certainly at our previous stop, that's something that was critically important to us. But I think you just always have to be constantly evaluating the player. And if that player fits you and fits what you're looking for on the field, having the conviction to go recruit them, kind of regardless of what the perception is.
What do you think, and is that sustainable? If they miss on those players, do you think they can out-evaluate their way into a competitive roster?
Well, yes and no. It depends on just kind of what your expectation level is. Like that's I can speak better for previous classes than this one just because I don't know all the details on 2027, right? We still have however many months to learn different details like that, where guys move in rankings, how that maybe shifts, how other schools look at them. But like, let's go back to last year's class, for example. Amari Polidor, I thought was a great example of this. Somebody that Penn State previous staff, Terry Smith, actually, let's clarify. So not necessarily previous staff, identified very early in the process. Guy who had excellent numbers, put up not always, I mean, his film was mixed at times because he moved around a little bit, right? But, and I think that kind of hindered his recruitment from some bigger schools, but they had the confidence and belief in him that, hey, this is someone who's being overlooked. Let's get him on board early, as they somewhat did last year in the summer, or a little before that. Of course, obviously, he ended up going to Va Tech and all that in the end. But my point with this is that has been a model at Penn State for years now and has to continue to be, because they are not, again, in that top 10, arguably even top 15 financial level. And so now at the same time, you're going to find that model at other schools as well, even some bigger schools that have more money. There's 25 guys to go around. Well, not every class is 25, but most schools still want to hit that 20 some number. And you still have the retention part of all this. And of course, the guys that are producing on the field are oftentimes the guys that you really got to make sure you pay up in the end and take care of and keep in your program. So that will always be some level, but also it kind of varies a little bit at schools. So they were able to do that, I think, with some of the guys, especially the guys that they had prior relationships with going back to their time at Iowa State.
Yeah.
The hard thing for me to say is I don't know who maybe they have since paid up more for, right? Like, for example, you brought up Elijah Gurton and David Terwell.
Yep.
I think Elijah Gurton's recruitment kind of came down to Penn State and Florida. We know Florida's an aggressive school.
Yep.
I would assume that Penn State had to be not a little more aggressive than they wanted to, but that's a guy that they had to fight for a little bit. David Terwell wasn't the case at the time. Now,
Yep.
What's interesting, and this is why I say it's hard to say for this class specifically at this time is, well, now David Terwell is moving up quite a bit in rankings, right?
Yep.
Does that impact other schools pursuing him? I don't know. I don't know his agent well enough to know, well, now you got a top 4-star guy. Are they going to try and go back to the bargaining table, right? So it varies throughout the entire cycle. You do your best to get those guys. Sometimes those guys then move up higher in rankings as data comes out on them and you learn more, and it's all just kind of an evolving cycle, I guess you'd say, or I don't know exactly the right word for it, but it never really ends until they're completely signed, and even then it doesn't completely end. We've seen that change with players at different schools over the years. So it's a balancing act. You got to find certain guys you're going to have to pay for, and you got to go in for those guys. They did that. They were planning to do that, with Khalil Taylor, with Deshaun Hall. From what I understand, they were being aggressive there. Different things worked out in the end. It didn't go in Penn State's favor. But then, of course, like I said, they have some others down where, those guys want to be here for Penn State as much as anything else. And, we'll see how things play out over the next 5 or so months, but they feel pretty good that those guys are kind of locked in.
Yeah, you're doing too good of a job of setting up the next clip, because you hit on two things at the same time that we both are going to talk about here in just 1 second. No, you're doing it. It's excellent. Let's address the money in recruiting, because I think that this is the misconception, is just because Penn State missed on those receivers and it didn't work out. There is a, at least according to this, a misconception that Penn State is not willing to be aggressive or go after guys in NIL spending, which you just outlined. And here's Derek Hoodjer talking about the money. And let me just set this up, because it was I did a bad job with the question, but he talked about character and fitting Matt Campbell's culture as a thing that was important for this particular group of players, like for their recruits. And just it popped into my head, because I can't stop thinking from a football perspective, there is a certain benefit to that. And I know fans all want the players that are the best, right? The height, weight, speed guys, the ones that we all think are great. But there is an aspect of football where you have to be intrinsically motivated. You have to want to love football, because once you get the reward at the end of the tunnel, do you still work hard? In the NFL, it's a problem. In college now, because of the money. it is a problem. But if you recruit with the idea of we want people here who love football and are excellent at football and have the talent, all the things, then it might be an advantage of you don't miss as much because you're not chasing every player that wants the dollar figure. So that's a longer way of the way I asked the question, but that was kind of the setup to him talking about money and recruiting here. And he gave kind of the full view of how they try to approach this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think you have to always still start with who is the kid, what's their family, what's their support system, and what are they looking for. And Penn State is a really special place where you can get a really powerful degree and you're a part of a program that's as proud of a tradition as any in college football. And the experience of being here for 4 or 5 years is really, really special. And I think on top of that, I think we have a coaching staff that can help players develop and become the best they can possibly become. And along the way, I think we've got a culture and kind of a program driven by Coach Campbell that is really meaningful and enjoyable along the way as well. And so I think you still have to figure out what are they looking for. And to the answer to the question, no, I don't think I ever want money to be the primary reason a young man chooses to come to Penn State. I think that would be an unfortunate reason to pick a school, and I think that can become lead down a scenario where the transferring in and out occurs at a higher rate than you want it to be. But at the same point in time, we're not naive to the fact that finances are a part of the decision for almost every player. And no different than we don't want money to be the reason a player that we believe in comes here. We also don't want money to be the reason a player we believe in does not come here. And so we work really hard to try to find that middle ground and make sure that if all boxes are kind of checked and this player fits us and this player fits the scheme and fits the need on the roster, and then obviously the finances are the kind of the last box to check there.
It's a lot of needles to thread. Ryan, what do you think of the answer there? A little bit longer of a one.
Yeah, I totally agree. I really honestly don't have a whole lot to add to that. That's how it was here previously. That's how it is now. It's very similar to what we've always seen, and I think that's how 90% or more, college football programs want to handle those things. I do really appreciate him being open about the fact that, when you do bring guys here who are probably very talented, but their heart was somewhere else, and they paid more. I think Chaz Coleman to Tennessee is a great example of this, by the way. It leads to it makes it easy to find an out. And that's what you're trying to avoid. You can get they could go hard on some of these guys, but at the end of the day, one, if the player doesn't leave and wants to stay, they're just going to want more. And if you already felt like you overpaid, well, guess what?
Yeah.
You're about to really overdo that, especially, it all just comes back to what your top number is, what that total is. I think for Penn State, it's in the mid-30s, I believe. And there are teams now that are mid-40s and pushing 50, right? I don't know that for sure. I think that. Or at least I think that's kind of where it was last year, and I don't think much has changed, put it that way. Maybe off. Sorry, Derek, if I'm off. But, it really does come back to a lot of the fact that if you're overpaying from the start, that's not going to change. And if you're getting guys whose hearts aren't here or aren't here for at least 80% of the right reasons, you're probably kneecapping yourself when it comes to that development part. And that's, at the end of the day, what this staff still wants to build their roster.
And I think that the development part is dismissed a little bit because it sounds like everyone just thinks it's code for 3-star. And that's not necessarily true. Like, that's what I'm trying to say about the evaluations they have done, starting like Jameer Dean. And we'll get into this because of, he doesn't really answer this question, but like, if you can evaluate your way out of, a talent gap and you can get those guys on the roster, it doesn't mean you're not going to pay them in the future, right? They pay players on the roster. You just want to pay the players internally. And Ryan, this is actually I'm going to take a detour because I think this is the main point is it's cheaper to get your own guys, develop them. You'll presumably miss less and you'll be able to have more good football players than if you go and splash money on one or two. People in the chat are talking about, hey, you need to go at D-line, pay for D-line. You need to pay for skill positions. Everyone's got a different opinion on what you should pay for, but the point is you want all of it, and you have to find a way to get all of it. And it's not going to be by paying. You're not going to buy a championship, especially if you're Penn State. And so I guess, do you see that as well in terms of the ability to develop and retain and still produce high-quality football players that can compete for a championship?
It depends on the situation too, right? Like Penn State's wide receiver situation, the portal was different a little bit last year, but there are times where maybe, and I get it, we're talking portal or high school, it's different, but there are times where you do feel there is a hole or two here that can be plugged, especially when you're trying to, like, say you got your quarterback of the future, you got your running back of the future, you feel great about your 3 linemen you're bringing in, but man, if we could just get this stud wide receiver, right? And so those are situations where you get it. Wide receiver is also a position where that's not maybe the best example, because there are a dime a dozen, like there are hundreds and hundreds of wide receivers who aren't ranked like Jeremiah Smith in the beginning, who end up being incredibly good. So, maybe it's more of a defensive end. I mean, edge rusher is incredibly important. So is defensive tackle, as people are discussing in the chat. So I see both sides of that. At the end of the day, Penn State's always going to be built off of development. And guess what? So is Ohio State for the most part. Yes. Miami's had a lot of transfers in and out. It's, but they've also developed a lot of guys as well. So, I mean, it goes both ways. I think most programs still want that development part to be absolutely king, paramount of that process. But yes, there are times where you have to find holes. We've seen Penn State try to do that over the years as far as the previous staff went, and some of them worked out, some of them didn't. The money then was also a lot different than it is now. So it's kind of hard to explain. That's why, like, this NIL topic's always hard, because every year is just something different or more money.
There's always a caveat or an exception too. Like there's always an example of where you can make a case for the other side. But in general, going to the portal, people are like, I would rather buy a quarterback every year than develop one. That is far more expensive. Like, you are spending far more resources, and you can still miss. And I think that's the point, is you want to have as many of those answers on your roster as possible. And if you're finding the right players, they're not transferring either. You're not losing in your depth. Even if you have to fight for it, you're not losing your depth as much as the bidding war that happens every year for certain rosters. Am I saying things that are generally factual, or true?
Truthfully, I was reading the chat here. I apologize, I didn't hear exactly what you said, because like I'm sorry to change subject on you, but like,
sure, go for it.
Like Zone 2 cardio, how much they've missed in PA. I just don't feel like it's.
Let me read for the podcast audience. Take a look at 247, the top 27 prospects on the board, and you'll see how poorly Penn State has done in high school recruiting, even with the team that took the top PA talent. Even with the teams that took the top PA talent. So yes, this transition, Zone 2 cardio is pointing out how Matt Campbell and his staff did not come in the first 6 months and secure some of those top talents, because they weren't going to just buy the recruitment. That's how I would read it. Of they were behind in these situations. They're not going to just buy the recruitment if they can.
I just think it's just an unfair. Like it's. I'm not trying to make excuses for them, right? Like, there are ways where, I mean, Khalil Taylor, there's a couple of ones that I feel like kind of got away from him a little bit, but to use like the top 10 or 12 of those guys as an example just isn't fair in this situation. When you look at how long, like, Penn State has taken some hits, and that's kind of where I was going with the next question that was right below it, about how, like, there's nothing to apologize for. The brand has taken hits nationally over the years. We've been gradually clawing our way back. Then, last year was a huge miss. Like, that is a reality. I wouldn't say over 20 years, but there have been ups and downs. I mean, like, before Franklin, obviously, everything that happened in 2011, all that, like, that did hurt Penn State a little bit, and it hurt for a little while. And then what was the next thing? Well, it was Penn State's back, but they can't get over the top. So there has always been this kind of ceiling that I think fans need to understand. And now what is it? Well, now it is Penn State doesn't have the money that some of these other schools have. And all those things are true to some degree. I'm not trying to make excuses. That is what it is. You can still do more with less, though. And I think Matt Campbell and the staff can do that. Where I'm just trying to go with this is like, just win, baby. Like, just go out and have a year where you shut some people up, and the doubters of like, well, can Matt Campbell do it? Well, we're about to find out. And if he can, I promise you, it's going to make a big impact on how 2028 goes. For 2027, it was a lot of guys who didn't know this staff. We're talking PA wise and even regional talent. So you're already starting back at ground zero, basically. And oh, by the way, some of them, Max Hiller follows Troutwine to Florida. You weren't going to win that one. A lot of them got paid more than what Penn State was willing to pay. And so every question that those guys had are still kind of there. And also, by the way, they got paid more and had relationships with other schools. Yeah. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I really still strongly believe you go out and have a great season, even if it's 10-2, right? And you lose to USC, Michigan, Washington, some kind of combination of that. I think it shuts a lot of people up. It shuts a lot of doubters up of whether Matt Campbell and the staff are ready for this. And that will help so much with 2028 and beyond. So
I'm going to follow this up with kind of the thoughts of where I was going with this question. So we focus on, you mentioned the top numbers, $40-50 million, top 10. What are the college football playoff participants spending? And my question is not just the EST syndrome of it, who's spending the biggest number. Is there a threshold to get into the conversation? And here is his response.
As long as you put yourself in a position to remain competitive with the players that you identify as players that can win at the highest level. And there's a lot of really good football players out there, and you have to make decisions on when is the guy that we're going to go get really aggressive on and try to make sure this is the player that's not going to walk away from here without, feeling like they've been put in a position where they're really valued in a lot of ways. But I think that's the key, is you got to allow yourself to be competitive within each of those individual conversations. But then you got to do it across the entirety of the roster, obviously, and not have any like total outliers. And I do think that's where you got to find some value of guys that maybe haven't had an opportunity to prove it yet at this level, or maybe their recruitment occurred late, and whatever it may have been, try to find some value in there to balance out the entirety of the group.
Here's my point. You're not going to buy a championship at Penn State. And if they did, there would be somebody saying, yeah, but, right? Like, this goes back to the whole thing about James Franklin and the resources he had while at Penn State, and him wanting more resources to compete with teams that had all the resources, and everyone going, stop complaining and just win games, right? So, like, the same logic should then apply of, like, if you spend enough money strategically, judiciously, Penn State, can they be in the ball? Do they have enough money to be in the ballpark to win big games and be in the conversation for a championship, and maybe they get lucky and they get to the national championship game, right? Because he talked about it. If you have the personality fit, if you have the skill and scheme fit, and money works out for you, then you're absolutely going to be a Penn State football player if we can help it. So all those other things have to apply anyway. And so we're focusing on the money and only the money. There has to be other factors, including coaching, which is, I'm assuming, part of what they think they can do here to make this program actually win those big games. That should be the on-field product for Matt Campbell. That's the argument. Like, they did more with less at Iowa State. Now they're going to try and do more with more. And so can they do that? And that's got to be part of the calculus here. So they don't have to get every top 100 recruit, but they have to identify the right talent and bring it in. And if they find inefficiencies, then that has to be also commended, not just looking at all the losses, but looking at the complete picture. And I know that's a bit of a ramble, not leading to a point or a question, but I just think, like, we have to look at the picture holistically. And I don't think that is the focus of these NIL conversations is not the holistic approach. It is only about where are we, where is Ohio State, where is Oregon, and then yelling at the distance between those 2 and 3 different points on the landscape.
I just keep looking at the chat here, and so there's so many things I like to get into. We only have so much time, but when I say winning cures all, I do not mean that Penn State's going to be a national championship contender in a couple of years. Money is going to play a massive factor in that. What I'm saying is right now that class is like what, 23rd. I said fringe top 25. I got yelled at by some people on the board, and that's where we're at right now. And it could drop lower. Just knowing how On3's rankings work, they're 23, but there's a lot of schools below them right now that still have to add talent and will add talent. And so what I'm saying more so is the winning part is what gets you back to top 15-ish classes, in my opinion, because while I completely agree with what all you guys are saying, that the money part is still a major issue for Penn State getting to that next level, there has to be a little bit of a rebuilding process here. And I know none of you want to hear that, but I'm also the one talking to a lot of coaches, parents, players, and that doesn't sound like I'm important. That's not what I mean by that.
No,
but that's
you have the actual context and information. That's why you're on screen. You have the actual.
What I'm saying is just like that's the feedback I hear constantly of like, man, really like Matt Campbell, great personality, love the guys there, love some of what we saw from him at Iowa State. But one, this is a different level. Yep. We all know that. And two, like you can't find cracks for that time. I mean, like if you look over the season, like what is it, like I thought I saw something the other day, it was like 50-some%, win rate total if you kind of look over their entire time there. And that, you can point to a lot of other coaches that were higher than that. So I just think it really so much. And I think if you look at their way they attack the portal, they know how important this first season is. It's no longer you get time to rebuild. Now, again, I just brought up how it's going to take time to stack up, but it really starts with showing this region that Penn State isn't going to be an 8-4 Iowa kind of program, right? And I'm not saying Iowa State, I'm saying Iowa. That because there's people who have concerns with that right now. There are big time coaches at big time high schools in this region who have brought that up to me. And I think everything that they see and hear from a recruiting perspective, they like. But to get your kids to that school, you have to show it as well. And I think that's so incredibly important for this first season, especially when we talk about the schedule and how it lines up and all those kind of things. So that's what I mean more than anything, as far as just get back to where you were, it's top 15-ish, somewhere in that range. Because I do believe financially, it's if you look at the recruiting rankings, man, they're not that far off from where the top kind of schools out there. Yeah, sure, you'll find some outliers like Indiana and all that who do a little more through the portal, and you'll find, a few other schools, but for the most part, there's a lot of symmetry there on how the rankings work. And so I do believe Penn State's better than number 23 financially, but they also, this staff was, kind of had their hand cut off from them, to start that 27 cycle.
I mean, this is the immediate now, right? We say when you hire a position coach, and they take over the recruiting process, give them their first full cycle, right? To get guys into the program that they've built relationships with. That's this on a mass scale where I'll go back to what I said before, as much as money's still going to be a factor and they're not going to relationship their way out of spending money to get recruits, but 28 should, in theory, lead to better results because they have the time to build those relationships where all things being equal, they can get in the ballpark with the money. That's all I'm trying to say. Beard and Broke 92 is having a meltdown over what I said. Get in the ballpark, and then, as Ryan said, win games and restore confidence, and the money gap won't be as easily decided at this moment by in time. Other players. Yeah.
Yes. Right now, it feels drastic. And don't get me wrong, it felt drastic last June too, right? Yeah. With Luke Wafel goes elsewhere, and Damari Simeon goes elsewhere, and however many guys there were. And
Carter Meadows.
I
forgot about Carter Meadows.
Yeah. But right now, in my opinion, that's not the biggest issue, because it can go the other way too, guys. It could go worse. It can. When you're already behind money-wise, and maybe you don't hit the ground running this year.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of where I am of what would you prefer the result be? In my eyes, the best result is to have a good season, restore confidence in those coaches and those parents and those players throughout the region that Penn State is still going to be Penn State. And then you chip away at the other things with time.
Right.
And I think that's the goal. I think that's how Derek Hoodjer sees it. I think that's how Matt Campbell sees it. And I think that's the most realistic, best approach for taking that next step, whatever that step may be. I think fans want it to be 5 steps from where they're at. Right now, it's take one, and that's go out and win, show what you got, show that you're capable for this level to be one of the top, handful of teams in the Big Ten, and build off of it.
Yeah. I think you nutshelled that perfectly. So let's move on, and let's talk about your summer superlatives, which was 3 weeks coming. We've had this on the rundown for 3 weeks now, and I'm glad that we were able to save it for today because I do want to talk about this class of 2027 and some of the players in it that have an opportunity to do what. And that's what we're going to get through today with your superlatives. I don't think we're getting through best dancer, best dressed, or prettiest eyes or anything like that.
We'll save that for signing day.
Yeah. So what are we breaking out here when it comes to the superlatives that you went and got the information from sources about this class?
If you missed the top of the show, we kind of talked about how I went about building this, and basically we just polled a bunch of people that I try to talk to regularly and just get their opinions on things, and it was varied for some. There was one here where it wasn't, and that was actually as interesting to me as anything, and we'll get into that here in a sec. But it's a combination again of kind of my opinion, or let's put it this way: my opinion started these questions, and then where they went from there kind of varied. We'll start with kind of, name a 2027 commit that I believe is set to have a big senior season. And so this one was a question where got multiple answers from different people that I'd, follow up on this, follow up on that. And through the end of those conversations, I think running back Chotou from Paramus Catholic is a great pick for this. And there's multiple reasons why. I think a good place to start at least would be the fact that he missed 4 games last year with an ankle injury, early in the year. Paramus also had a senior running back who they, basically split times with. And yet, even knowing that, he still got 929 yards, averaged 7.6 yards per carry, had 13 touchdowns, had a good year. But guess what? Now it's his time to shine. And so I think when you look at Chu and you compare him to some of the higher ranked running backs out there, he's got a little slept on. And look, it's not often we say that guys at Paramus Catholic are kind of being slept on a little bit, but I do believe there might be some of that here. Another thing that really impressed me with Oda this year is just kind of what we saw track and field times. That there was always questions on, what is the ultimate speed and all those kind of things. Well, he dropped from an 11:06 100 in April to a 10:71. By the end of May. And so truthfully, right, I mean, dropping 4/10 is kind of unrealistic to do in a month and a half. At the same time, there's certainly improvement there. He was probably always like a 10-9 kind of guy, but he's learning better form and stuff. And you see a drastic jump there where in reality, he's probably always was a little faster than 11:06. But the most important thing is you're seeing physical growth. You're seeing a speed growth. You're seeing positive indicators that you want to see from a player in the offseason. And then when you add on the fact that, he missed time last year, the ball's his to really take and run with this year. I think it sets up very well for him. Now, Paramus has a very hard schedule, right? So I don't want to sit here and be like, this is a 1,500-yard rusher or any of those things like that. But you can have an awesome senior season and not necessarily have all these gaudy numbers that others have because of your competition level. That's the beauty of high school football. That's what makes my job fun. And I'm not going to pretend I'm a scout, but Charles, right? Same with you, T. Frankie. I mean, you like to watch film. I want to say I like to watch film, but you know what I mean? You get into that stuff a little bit more than me. I'm more the relationship guy, but long way of saying this sets up well for him. Now I will also add real quick, Will Wood, Dylan McGee were 2 guys that were heavily brought up as well.
I like the Dylan McGee pick. I like a lot.
Yeah, McGee, to kind of hit on Wood real quick, it's just kind of consistent growth with Will. He's setting up. Xavier Brothers has some good talent around him this year. Let's see where that goes. That was kind of the mindset there. With McGee transferring to DeSoto, that's a big part of what has people excited there. DeSoto is an incredible program in Texas, so they're just very curious to kind of see how he's used and maybe more importantly, how he's maximized better. That was one thing that was kind of brought up to me consistently. So I went with Oda as far as a pick. It's a running back, right? We can kind of easier to kind of gauge, but also I want to stress, don't overthink the just pure number part of that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So two things I want to follow up with those other two candidates. First off, Chotou, I think is the right answer. Just all the things you said. I don't want to have to say them all myself just to make myself feel better. But with Dylan McGee, he was also injured last year. Like, he was banged up. I wouldn't say he was injured in a sense that he, missed games like Odo, but there's a clear gap between his talent and like his physical abilities and then the film and the production. And it is easier with a running back to say, like, he got 10 touchdowns as opposed to a corner where you just decided not to throw at him. Like, offenses decide, yeah, we're just not going to throw at this guy. And you don't get anything to back up why he had a breakout season. The only thing I have a question with when it comes to Will Wood is he had bonkers numbers as a junior. Mm-hmm. And so how's he going to have a breakout season? Is he going to throw for 10,000 yards? Because
Stop thinking about the numbers. And so yes, yeah. And
so, but like, his film is amazing. This is my point. Is his film is already amazing. He's all like, to me, the whole thing about Will Wood is just the size and the strength and all those things that probably aren't going to meaningfully change. But you've already decided he's better than those things. And so I think he's better, than the perception of him in general when it comes to the whole discourse about Will Wood. I love his film already. I'm already on board. I feel like he already had a breakout season as a junior. So I'm just curious as where he's going to go.
And that's why I didn't pick him, T-Frank. That's why I don't know what else to say on that. But I just want to make sure it's acknowledged that, there are people in Lash who are very excited about his future, as they should be, right? They're excited about all these guys. I don't want to overthink that part. But, he was brought up and somebody we discussed multiple times. And just at the end of the day, it was more so Chew one, McGee, and then Wood, I would say, just from didn't actually really poll it that way, but that's kind of just how I took the general vibe of those conversations. So,
all right, so let's go to the next one. Immediate impact, a guy that's going to walk in and have an opportunity to be a player.
Yeah. So this one was, what's the best way to put it? I mean, there were some discrepancies with this one, but it was more.
I feel like there's a lot of guys that could be on this list, so I feel like there could be a lot of guys that would be in the conversation.
When you got how many people are Lash? If I can poll
right
3/4 of Lash, you're gonna get so many different answers. And that's that's the beauty of recruiting is, you see a recruiting staff and you think like, oh, these guys are all uniform on this or that. And that is never, ever the case. There's way more mixed opinions than most fans would probably think. My pick here was Cooper Terwilliger, and there's multiple reasons for it. I think you start with the fact of just let's start with the depth chart, right? It's very kind of top heavy right now.
Yep.
And so obviously the 5 for 5, how that plays out I believe that could impact Brahmer. I might believe T-Frank, he could maybe come back
he's a true senior, so he would be able to come back.
Yeah, for Mannequin. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
For Mannequin Rapper, they have another year still, but of course Rap is look, I still keep coming back to Rapplier was maybe the best tight outside of Tyler Warren, on this roster in the last couple of years. And
I would be shocked. I would be shocked if him or Bramer came back if they have good seasons. Like, just because there's a certain point where you go to the NFL. Like, sorry for Penn State fans that want them to come back because they want them. It's the best thing for them to go to the NFL. That was what I was going to say earlier. Is like, Ben Bramer is going to be a feature in the offense from a passing perspective and has the opportunity to put up numbers that the NFL will desire. And so, like, if you come back because, like, that's the wrong decision. Like, that's just the wrong personal decision.
And I agree with all that. And we'll add, I think Rapplier is better. So, or like more desirable NFL wise. And so, he's got to put it all together, right? Coming off an injury, but we saw that coming together. So, anyway, let's get back to Cooper Terwilliger. But my point with that is it's a heavy, top heavy with upperclassmen, and that's part of it. Of course, they will probably hit the portal at this position. I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't try to find some sort of a proven sophomore, somebody that they want to come in and compete for the following year. But to get back to Terwilliger, it really comes down to a couple different things. 6'5", 220 already. He's not far off physically from being there. And he's in a situation where they believe fundamentally he can kind of bring you different. He's well-versed in all of them, right? We'll say a B kind of player from a blocking perspective. They like his hands. Is he the freak athlete that we've seen? I think T-Frank.
He's a little bit like Rap. He's a little bit like Rap in that sense.
There are some similarities there. I wouldn't say he's as athletic as Rappo. That's where I come back to it. But but also like that doesn't matter when this is an important thing to keep in mind. Mauser has played 4 tight ends at least in 8 games his 2 years as an OC. He likes to have some sort of a rotation there. And so, some of that was a little bit of injury related, but you're going to have that. We know that's impossible. And so there was, just from talking to people, there was a strong belief that like Terwilliger could potentially come in here next year and be like 4-5, like right there before he really ever gets to prove it. But they also he's a no nonsense business guy. Like they believe he's going to come in here and isn't going to get distracted by, downtown State College. I'm sure we all do a little bit. Let's be honest, right? I mean, I do. I'm 38 now. I still get distracted in there. But, he's here for football. And so they love that combination of, hey, look at what we have here. We know this is a guy who's going to come in, cares about the right things. Is it going to be an issue academically, all those kind of things. And we know he's going to give it his all as soon as he gets here. And so those things all combined is kind of where we went with Cooper Terwilliger on that one. There's other guys you can point out. Truthfully, I don't 100% remember the conversations and who others were talking about at the time. This was one of the first ones I asked. This was like almost a month ago now, but 20 plus days for sure. There were others, but Terwilliger at the end ended up being the guy that everybody we talked to agreed with, like, yeah, that would make sense. Where others were a little more iffy, talked about, well, this portal this position becomes more important in the portal or not.
Yep.
It's just so hard to say. You got to let the preseason roll out, and see. They got to still get a better feel for their depth. They only have 15 practices, and then of course how the season rolls out. So Terwilliger is where we landed on that, and we'll move on.
Okay, move on. Because I was just curious the other guys that could be in that conversation, but that we can.
I don't exactly remember, and I don't want to BS you. Yeah,
I was just going to give my opinion. That was it. It was going to be not a factual.
Who's it going to be? Who do you want to be? Who do you think?
I think Case Alexander has a high floor in terms of like physically.
Frank, you just kind of beat me to that, buddy. Never mind. I shouldn't ask you this question because we have our next one. Get to our next one. I don't have a graphic or anything, so just get into it. What's your Who's
next?
the safest bet to live up to their ranking, right? I formed it as living up to their ranking. I guess the better way of how I formed it to them was just, who's that one player that you feel damn good about? Like, that's pretty much exactly how I asked that question. And this was the only guy unanimously, and I mean that. I didn't just talk to recruiting people. I didn't just talk to offensive defense. I mean, I'm saying this was all over Case Alexander. And I thought that was so intriguing to me because I never get that ever. And I wrote that in the story of like, over the years, I've done similar and I've never kind of seen, I think I talked to 3, maybe 4, and all of them were like, that's your first pick. So that was really intriguing to me. And there's so many reasons for it. Let's start with the fact that his dad's an NFL player, right? Played 10 years in the NFL. So him and Cooper were both brought in to that business-like approach. I keep using that word, but it's the truth with him and Terwilliger. That's been ingrained in them.
It's not a negative. Like, that is an immense positive. That's that's treating it like a job, which means you're dedicated to it. Like, you treat it seriously.
I remember talking to Case's coach the other day. This maybe 2 weeks ago, and like one of the best quotes I thought is like, I was like, what's he like? And he's like, well, he wants to hunt, he wants to fish, and he wants to play football. That's about it. Like, end quote. And I was like, all right, well, he's gonna fit in really well in State College if that's the case. But they're just, again, I think it's again, dad, what they've seen from dad, and they know how the family is, and then also what they've seen from Cooper and how Cooper has done here, and they believe that Case is going to be the exact same way. And if not, might be even a little bit of a better player. And that's not me. That's not them saying that. Like, Cooper has said that. And like, Kate.
Can I just jump in with a film thing here? You mentioned Cooper Terwilliger in terms of like guy that could produce early. You can say every single thing you said about Cooper Terwilliger about Case Alexander, except that he has modern linebacker speed, coverage ability, and run defense talent. Like, there's nothing missing from his profile as a prospect on film. He can do all of it.
Yep. And so one last thing in that point, and the story I wrote was one of the people I talked to, they compared him to Alex Tash, a guy who came in and played pretty early, right? And Alex has had injury problems. Case has not, knock on wood, right? I don't want that for anybody or Alex or anyone. But they see a lot of similarities in him and Alex Tash, and just the way they go about their business, what they bring physically to the game, how they've always been kind of mentally ahead of most players as far as being able to read the plays and all that, and being film gurus and stuff. So Case Alexander was a unanimous pick with that, which I I don't know if that'll ever happen again. I think there was 3 or 4 for Case that I talked to. I know at least 3. And when all 3 you're saying one guy, that's almost unheard of. I mean, when you got 20 some to choose from, it's pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, and about playing early is just you have Kale Brazina, you have Alex Tash, you have a couple of young guys in the system like Cam Smith that we know they're very high on. So could he play with the 5-for-5 rule and be on special teams and have like a part of the depth chart? Sure, but I think you mentioned the situation and the players ahead of him. I think that's a strong conversation point in that. So last one here is most underrated in the class, and your answer here, I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I want to have a conversation about it. So
let's clarify. It wasn't necessarily most underrated. It was which 2027 commit are we not talking about enough?
Okay,
and so
I changed that to underrated. My bad.
Yeah. So and you can read it that way. I certainly think underrated is very subjective, right? Because how we rank them and how fans look at the rankings, compared to how they're ranked on their board, are very different. Not as different as you think in some situations, but there's discrepancies. And so that's why I stay away from the underrated word. I try to stay away from anything rankings wise.
Good point.
Especially when I'm asking people who aren't using the 0-3 rankings. And so that's how I worded it this way. Long story short, we went with cornerback Caron Caesar. And I love this one, actually. I think a lot of reasons why we're not talking about him enough. One, he committed very early. He's one of those guys like Amari Polidor, although he committed earlier than Amari, where he wants to be at Penn State. He wants to work with Terry Smith. I don't get the sense he wants to drag out and money and all those kind of things. I'm sure he's getting taken care of. Everybody wants more money. I get all that. But I get the sense that he's very happy with his decision and wants to just become a better football player. And so that's when those kind of early commits and out of sight, out of mind, especially when you're ranked, 600 some, they kind of often get swept under the rug a little bit. And that's not fair to them, but that's why we're bringing this up. Another guy who hasn't camped a ton, but he did do it one time at Penn State 2 years ago. So freshman going into sophomore year, ran a 4.6, man, as a baby. I mean, that's not bad. That's what was he, probably 14 going into 15, probably 15 around that time. Going into sophomore year, 9 foot broad. There's no reason to believe he wouldn't have those athletic measurables that we've seen from so many other cornerbacks, right? Like Kia Jones coming out here now, and you're seeing some of the numbers that he put out this year and some others. There's no reason to believe that he's not there now, especially when you put on the film, man. There's no questions about speed with him.
It's more his system, like what he's asked to do. He's a pure zone corner in his system where you don't get to see him lock in and play match man coverage where he's shadowing an athletic receiver down the field. He's playing with his eyes. He's playing with intelligence. And whenever you do that, it becomes, okay, well then what am I not seeing? And you just assume he's not fast. I guess I would say I don't see elite athleticism when I watch, but you're right. I don't have the numbers to say otherwise that he is or isn't. It's just I don't see the things that make you go, okay, that's obvious. That's very obvious that he is explosive or that he has elite long speed, but it doesn't seem like anything's missing necessarily either.
Best way to put it is we've talked a lot about Keyshawn Telfair. We've talked a lot about Dylan McGee, earlier, obviously Gleason and other guys. Like, I don't think Terry Smith looks at Caron Caesar much lower than those guys. I really don't. Do you get
a sense of where they think of him? Because I could see just because he's so smart.
They love that too. He's versatile. Like he could be inside or outside, and they love that part about him. That's another thing. I think I had one source. I'm trying to think. I think one mentioned that he might be the most instinctual player in this class. Like as far as just and you got to love that. I mean, it's not always about. I'm a sucker for the numbers. You're a sucker for the numbers. We're numbers guys. I do like that part of the game. But so much of it's right here, right? I mean, that's the same thing with Case Alexander. That's why Case Alexander, I think, is safest bet, because if you put on this film, there's a reason he's getting almost 100 tackles every year, because he's just smart and he prepares right and he knows where to be at the right times. And you see that so much in Caron Caesar offensively as much as defensively. And that's what they love. It's just on both sides of the ball. The kid is making the right decisions way more often than not. And so it doesn't have to always just be because he's an athletic freak. It's because he's able to see things before everybody else is able to see it. And if that gets you 5 extra yards, or if that gets you a tackle, 3 yards down the field instead of 7 yards
that
down
gets
the
you
field.
interceptions, Ryan. Like, that's the most valuable thing, is if you can see things and be ahead, like, that's how you jump routes. The confidence and the instincts to get interceptions comes from the neck up and not just from your physical ability to backpedal, break, and transition. Like, that's important. That's the part you do in the offseason, but actually being able to do it on the field, it's a rare skill. It's why we talked about Zakee Wheatley the way we did for 5 years, because he consistently found the football, and not everybody does. And if Caron Caesar has those skills and can do that, then yes, that is a highly valuable trait to have in your backfield.
Another thing I love, just real quick, is Bill Belton, of course, went to St. Augustine, but he was at Winslow Township last year. And I've talked to Bill for many years now. Really always appreciate his help. He's always very open about Julian Peterson, very open about some of these guys that they've gone after over the years. There's no player that he's spoken more highly of than Caron Caesar. I mean, calls him a Penn State guy through and through. And so I really respect that. He knows Caron better than I do. And so, just getting his true opinion, which Bill has always been very helpful. Not all coaches are like that. And I think it's partly because we have a relationship that goes back however many years. He knows kind of, we understand what to talk about, what not to talk about, and all that. There's never been a player that he has been more outright excited about and open about than Caron Caesar. And that speaks, I want to make sure that's mentioned, because Bill's been great about that stuff over the years. And I kind of was wondering if Caron would actually join him at St. Augustine, but it doesn't look like that'll be the case.
Well, you've convinced me. I'm going to take a second look at Caron Caesar during his senior season and see what's up. Because, like you said, I thought he was a good football player. But, yeah, I'm definitely not talking as much about him, even internally in my internal monologue, than the other players. Yeah. So I think that you and your sources have brought up some really great points, and I'm interested to see how that all works out.
And there's a lot of guys. I mean, I saw Landon Blue mentioned, like, no doubt. I mean, I would love to talk about Landon Blue more. I'm struggling to get there.
I'd love to see him play real football, like 11-man football. I would love to see that. I don't want to see him lining up in a 3-point stance because, like, he's a tight end at times, because that's how their game works, and not because he's like, oh no, he might be a tight end. It's like, well, I don't know. Anyway,
yes, Nittany Eagle, Brad. Yeah, that Bill Belton, the old Penn State quarterback. He was the head coach at Winslow Township. They won, I believe, 2 state championships back to back, and now he's gone to St. Augustine, which is a private school in the area, and produced DeMar Simeon and multiple others. No, never mind. There's 1 or 2 others that they've recruited, but yeah, that Bill Belton. I will say, Carter Blattner was another name mentioned there. Of just they really like what he brings, and as I dug on a little bit more, I felt a little better about going with Caesar. But Blattner was another guy mentioned for this topic.
All right, so that's what we got for today. We're gonna save our 2028 look ahead until next week, because again, it's gonna be you and me, Ryan. That's what we started the show with. Like, Fitz is gonna miss the next 2 weeks, miss some stuff in June. Like,
well, wife wants to move up vacation, buddy. So I might be the 2 weeks after that then. So you might just be rolling solo for a little while. But,
everyone's gonna love the T. Frank solo recruiting show. That'll go over so well.
What are you talking about? We got Nate Power, the recruiting expert. He said so in the very beginning, from what I saw.
Here's what's gonna happen on that show. I will just open up the chat, and everyone can yell at me about Penn State's money. And then we'll just do that show. We'll do a bloodletting. Everyone can get into like the yoga
Definitely
screaming.
Make sure I am on vacation for that show. Okay, great.
All right, Ryan. That'll do it this week for us here on the BWI Live Show. I'm Thomas Ryan Carr. That is Ryan Snyder. As always, subscribe here to the YouTube channel. Check out BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can join us for $1 and decide if you want to join us for then the rest of the year, because we've got a great stuff coming up for you next week. We will be into Big Ten Media Days, and then essentially at that point, it is a full sprint until January. So get ready. Lock in. Subscribe here. Make sure you keep your eye out for all our great content here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. For Ryan, I'm Thomas Frank. We'll talk to you later.